Hey, it's Drybear. And the Arc Raiders server slam is concluded, and there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that are experiencing Arc Raiders withdrawal because they can't play it, and now we're on that final march to October 30th for the full release of the game. So just a little bit to go, just under 10 days now for you to play the full version of the game. So what I wanted to focus on today was kind of, summarizing and congealing all the developer responses we've seen on the game overall, some decisions they've made. They've done some interviews over the last week or so in various locations. So I want to give some highlights to what the developers are talking about, because I know there's a lot of people right now that are wondering, okay, I don't like this game, can you change it? There are people that want more PvE or a PvE only mode. There are people that want more PvP or a PvP only mode. There's people asking about first person versus third person. And also there are people that just like the game exactly as it is, and they want the developers to change nothing. Don't cave to the feedback. Do what you've been doing. We love it. So let me know where your head is down below on all of these topics and what you think about the game in general. If you're hoping for it to change or you're hoping for it to stay the same, let's dive into the developer responses. The first topic is around PvE versus PvP. This is a big discussion point on the game in general. Again, there are people that want it to be more like a Darktide, Vermintide, Helldivers 2, where it's mostly about fighting enemies and getting loot. That formula has been proven to work, and some people just want it. They don't want to deal with the things that come with PvP, griefers, campers, people on voice chat, whatever else. Like, they want to have a game that's more focused on PvE, and the people that want PvP to be amplified as well. So where do the developers sit on this concept? So we're going to be referencing this interview as one of the interviews we talk about. This just happened over the weekend at TwitchCon in San Diego. I'm not going to focus on people's names, because I think that creates witch hunts and whatever else. Not like you can't figure out who these people are, but I will give you their titles so you can understand where these responses are coming from. So far left of the casting couch, I shouldn't say that, far left of the interview couch over here is design director. Anyone at a director level position in a game production environment is going to be focused on direction, which means high-level decisions. Should we be doing this? Should we not be doing this? And ensuring that everything aligns with the direction they're making. Director level positions vary widely depending on what company we're talking about. Some larger companies have directors that only make those directional decisions and oftentimes get involved in staffing and, making sure that they're hitting the bottom line and that sort of thing. There's also, I've worked with directors that are hands-on. They will assign themselves tasks daily. They're in the engine daily and they're working, boots on the ground, that sort of thing. But a design director is someone who generally oversees game design, system design, level design, things like that, and they're making sure that the design of the game is cohesive and fits what they're looking for. In the center of it, we have a technical designer. Anytime you see technical in front of another position, that usually means that they have a technical background, but they fall in the camp of the second word. So a tech artist is an artist that usually has a good background in technology. Oftentimes, tech artists are people that work with 3D modelers, concept artists, riggers, animators, and they help those people get their creations into game by using their technological, background. In this case of a technical designer, it usually means someone that is in the design department but has a background in programming, coding, or engine work, which means that they have a design background, but they are very well versed in implementing the things that are being designed and created. And far side of the couch, you have an art director. So again, similar to design director, focused on making sure that the art style fits, shapes, silhouettes, color, textures, the environment, lighting, things like that. They make sure that everything's on pace for that same kind of reason. So back to the question, PvE versus PvP or a blend in between, what's the goal?
So I think it's actually really fun with PvPvE. I know a lot of people who knew the game from before knew that we were previously a PvE game. And when we made the move to PvPvE, we actually did quite an elaborate and meaningful decision of keeping the PvE as much as it were before. So we really try to keep the enemies quite threatening and keep the behaviors quite complex. So we want to balance it in a way where you know that you both have to keep your eye out for players, but also for the AI. But then obviously a lot of extraction shooters actually try to bring the PvE a little bit back, because that can take away from PvP, I know a lot of competitive players can get a little bit sad if they're third-partied by a Rocketeer, which makes sense, but it is also part of what we have decided to do. We want the game to really feel like you are there and you're fighting other raiders, but the main threat is Ark, and we want to keep it that way.
Having a strong PvE element is what gives context to the PvP. Otherwise, you just sort of end up with a death match with a little bit of extra stuff happening on the side. So, I mean, we went through a lot of iterations with the PvE, as Nora mentioned, and we went up and down with difficulty and added and removed capabilities. So it really only starts to shine when the world and the setting and the context you're in the match are truly threatening and truly dangerous to you, because if you can just ignore the circumstances you're in and only focus on fighting other players, then that's all it kind of devolves into. So it's a very conscious effort with the mechanics we've added, the way enemies are designed, the way they're placed in the levels, and the other activities and things that happen throughout the round give texture to the PvP and make the player have to make choices and considerations while they engage in it. So I think that's kind of core to the experience, and we've really just tried to pursue that as much as possible.
So straight from the horse's mouth, their goal is not to be PvE only or PvP only. And while a lot of people have given speculations on what they want the game to be, you know, can they just add a PvE only mode for the people that like that? It sounds like what they're trying to do is they want to hit the center of that Venn diagram. They want equal in presence from the Ark robots and players, creating a dynamic, stressful environment where both are always in your face and neither one gets brushed off. And this actually does happen a lot in games that are PvEvP, is oftentimes one of those things get ignored. Either there aren't enough players and so you don't see players enough for it to feel like it's a big part of it, or there aren't like the robots or the AI enemies just aren't, you know, a big presence. They're kind of negligible. You can ignore them or you can destroy them very easily. It's not a big part of it. They actually want to hit that middle road right in the center. And one of the challenges with doing the center of the Venn diagram approach is you could end up creating something very special and unique, but you also run the risk of alienating each circle, right? Then if it's not tuned right, then the PvEers are upset and hate it. And if it's not tuned right, the PvPers are upset and hate it, and you end up pissing off both groups. So that's definitely a big part of it. Which kind of begs a follow-up question, right? If they are saying that they want PvE and PvP to be equal parts, how does that like play into the overall game experience and the locations you go to, right? Because obviously there are some places where it's harder for Ark robots to reach, and there's some places where it's harder for players to reach, and there's going to be habits and you know, persistent incentives for players to go one place versus another. So how do they feel about, like, are they trying to create a space where sometimes you'll go inside a building and it's all players, and sometimes you'll go into a facility and it's all robots? Is that the end goal, and is that something that they're striving for? Like, what's the target they're aiming at that they want to, you know, work towards getting in all the experiences across the game? Do they want variety, or are they doubling down on this Venn diagram idea?
As two of the maps, at the very least, were basically created when we were still a PvE game, they kind of set a good tone of us always wanting to have PvE in spaces. And that works really well, because then you do feel that there are really no areas where you're safe. But now that we have also introduced PvP into the mix, it is a really interesting kind of situation where you have to balance the, you know, players wanting to maybe run in and hide from a Rocketeer, but then you're around the corner and there's another player there. But that also actually pushed us to, again, want to make sure that we always have threat from the AI inside as well. Like, if you're rounding a corner, yeah, there could be a player there, but there could also be an enemy that will jump at you and kill you, because we want to make sure that tension should be sort of even. So if there's a space that is more tense for PvP, it should also be able to be tense for PvE. PvPvE. And the same with, if you have a space that is more secure, it should be secure from both ends, so that you don't have oh, here's PvP only, here's PvE only.
Obviously, with lofty ideas like this, it's not always going to be, good coverage everywhere. There's definitely going to be some locations that are going to be one more than the other, but I think it is kind of helpful to understand where the developers' minds are at on what they're thinking, right? So they actually, and you can kind of see this a little bit with the variety of enemies they have, right? When you go inside a building, your likelihood of being completely attacked by like, a bastion or, like a flying drone or something is much lower, but that's why they have the fireballs, the pops, the ticks, the turrets on the walls, things like that kind of bring into it. And some of the maps that aren't in the server slam that you'll see, there are areas where the medium to large size arc robots can reach and will reach. And so again, if you're thinking about like, what are they planning to do for the game? Their ultimate goal is that they do want arc robots and players to be a constant threat everywhere that you go. So there's that topic, but there's another question I want to address because I'm sure it's probably going to already come up in the comments. I can hear it in my brain. I can see the words being typed already. The question is, why even go PvPvE at all, right? If the game was PvE before, why would you bother switching? Like, why make that change? And some people have theorized that they did it for more money, or they did it because people that were doing the tech test before just, really wanted it to be PvP or whatever else. The question is, like, right from the bird's mouth, or, right from their mouth, what is it that they're doing? Why did they include PvP in the mix at all? This one comes from it was an in-person interview, but it was a journalist that just took notes and posted it online as well. So this is kind of the response here. This is from the EP, executive producer. EPs generally have not quite as wide as director level, but they can have a pretty wide set of responsibilities. Realistically, a lot of EPs are basically just general managers that are very hands-on. Again, it's kind of like just below like VP level. Like the executive producers are the final boss of production. They're the project heads for the project overall. They usually will oversee more of like a finance perspective and making sure things are aligned. But again, with all of these roles in game development, you can have EPs that are showing up to daily playtests every single day, talking to departments, having meetings. And you can also have EPs that, barely show up at all and are kind of just focused on the business aspect of it in general. But from this response here, the response here is, it took us a long time to understand what we were even trying to do with the game. However, after multiple tech tests, friends and family tests, alphas and things like that, the conclusion from the devs was there's moments of fun, but it doesn't consistently gel. And this is with the PvE only version. So they did multiple years of internal and some limited external testing with PvE only, and this was their conclusion. It goes on to say that we loved every aspect of what we were trying to design, but we came to the conclusion after quite a long time, guys, this game is not fun. So quite literally, from the horse's mouth, they say that they made the change because the game with just PvE wasn't enough. And with the conversation we just had of them saying that they always wanted constant coverage of tension all over the place, it sounds like in keeping with that idea, they introduced another forcing function. They have the bots as a forcing function. It puts pressure on you, it threatens your life, it makes sure that you're having to use consumables like bandages and healing and shields and use ammo to destroy your enemies, but they felt like having just that one front of arc robots wasn't sufficient. And you can say that, hey, it works for Helldivers 2, it works for Vermintide, it works for Darktide, it works for like Space Marine. You could name a whole bunch of PvE only co-op games that work exceptionally well for this idea, but this wasn't like, hey, they're just trying to make another BR or they're trying to make another extraction game. At least from what they've said publicly is that they felt that the game didn't feel very good being only PvE. Now, with, their experience with the finals and with Arc Raiders, it's very possible that we will get, maps and modes that are either more PvE than normal, or possibly even have limited modes that are PvE only. But in their mind, that the game didn't come together until they added players and enemy robots attacking you constantly at once that didn't feel like it was Arc Raiders until that point. But let me know where your head is at on that one. I know there's a lot of opinions on whether it should be one or the other, or whether the blend works well or not. Or, there's some people out there that just say, hey, I want this. Can you just give me a mode or a matchmaking queue that's only this so that I can enjoy it because I like everything else about it? There's just one element, like I don't like fighting players or I don't like fighting robots when I'm fighting players. Where does your head land on that? Next up is another hotly debated topic in the community right now, and there's good reasons for it, and that is the idea of the player camera. Currently, Arc Raiders is fixed as a TPS, that is a third-person shooter. It is in third person, and it is from behind your character. There's no way to swap camera. There are, game design-wise, reasons why you'd want to do first person versus third person, and currently there are pros and cons with that as well. In extraction type games, especially games like Hunt Showdown or Escape from Tarkov, the main reason why first person can work a lot is because it means that when you check corners, you have to do so with your face. Right? You can't peek around corners without exposing some part of your body or most of your body because your camera is your face, right? So there's a big kind of piece of feedback right now for Arc Raiders in that when you do third person at all, even if you do a swappable camera where you can go between first and third, like PUBG or things like that, being able to swap between them, even as long as third person exists for any reason, it gives people the ability to peek around corners without any risk, right? They can hide in a bush and they can look above the bush. They can hide behind a rock and they can peek around the rock. They can sit behind a wall and wait for somebody. And whether you like it or not, there's definitely pros for cosmetics. You can see your character. It gives you more incentive to decorate your character because you can see the backpack, you can see the skins, you can see all the other elements. There's definitely a gameplay portion of that is like, do we even want to have third person at all? Which is a great question, because realistically, even if you're the most charitable, fun-loving, humanity is great kind of person, third person camera incentivizes things like camping, griefing, baiting, setting up traps. People go to the extraction point and they wait. You can go inside a building and just camp. This happens a lot in third-person battle royales and extraction games too. People will just sit on the toilet and watch around the corner until someone shows up. There's a lot of downsides to that. So, wrapping this all back together, what do the devs think about first person, and is first person coming to Arc Raiders or not? This was another in-person written interview with the design director. So again, person who focuses on choosing the direction of the gameplay elements in the game overall. In his own words, says that first person view doesn't give us any benefit of any sort. Going on to say that I think so much of our immersion and world and the interactions that your character has with the things in the world, the enemies, the other players, is so amplified by the quality that's come from our animation team and our audio team and our environment team that it works together as this very nice package that you can really place your character in the world. So what he's saying here is part of the immersion and atmosphere comes from the third person camera. The fact that you can see your character, you can see them animating, and everything is viewed from a distance, right? Because there's obviously distance concerns when it comes to first person versus third person, being able to see from farther away and the requirement of scopes or, magnifying elements like binoculars and things like that. Goes on to say that that's not possible in first person, but third person did work so well for us that we never even really looked at first person. So not only is first person not on the immediate horizon for implementation, it never was and hasn't even crossed their minds. In their minds, this is a third person game and it's staying that way. And I know that there are hybrid models like Helldivers 2 and a few other games, but I think for us to try to do that, it would cause us to have to reevaluate so much of how our areas are built, the way they're laid out, because you get very specific sightlines once you go first person. Which is true. Even saying that once you start being able to put your face right up against an asset, it kind of falls apart. Now, based on that response, I think it's reasonable to expect that there is no first person coming to Arc Raiders at all, right? Realistically, not only is it a system that you have to put into the game, but it has much bigger impact and reasons to be worried too, right? Because when you go from 3P to 1P, whether people realize it or not, usually they're separate assets. Some games will chop off the arms of the 3P model and then put them in first person. You gotta have hands so you can hold the gun and things like that. But a lot of games end up creating separate assets. Like quite literally, they will have a third person model and then they'll create a separate asset of the arms that is meant to be used or viewed in first person. Same thing for the weapons viewed in first person. It also has implications for a field of view. Oftentimes sometimes not only is there a third-person FOV, but there also is a first-person camera FOV that happens to be separate from the FOV that shows on the assets that are being held. Like the weapon FOV or the arms FOV could be separate from the environmental FOV or the camera FOV. There's a lot of work to be put into doing a dual model of 1P or 3P, and honestly, even going from 3P to permanent 1P is a big undertaking. So based on what I've seen and what they've said, I would say that first person is not coming to Arc Raiders, at least in the near term, unless something major changes, but at least then you have your answer. Now, I want to put a caveat there, is that realistically, this is true in business in general, is that anytime it's nice to be very like pie in the sky and stick to your guns on the way up, but that isn't always the case on the way down, right? So realistically, no matter what your ideals are or your values are for a project, if the project starts to fail horrendously, that's when you start considering scorched earth, right? So like if Arc Raiders launches and for whatever reason the player count or retention is god awful, and after a couple months the player count is so really down far, regardless, you would probably still consider changes that might mix the game up. One of the most famous, a very easy example that's in a similar setup like this is Fortnite. Fortnite launched as a PvE base building game, flopped super hard, they pivoted to Battle Royale, and then everyone else knows the rest of that story, right? So when things fail, you reconsider your values, and I think that kind of just goes in hand with making games like this. So it's not to say that PvE is off the table or, first person is off the table, it's just they're not planning on it, it's not on their radar, so don't expect it anytime soon or maybe ever. Which can be easily reiterated by this quote from the design director talking about, hey, it's great to have ideals, and kind of the same, perspective that I have here as well. Again, he's a design director. I held design director for a while as well. I've held that same position, so I actually really like a lot of his responses and the way his perspective is set up. I think he's got the right of it on most of these things.
So I think that's one thing that will become very important, is ensuring that we intelligently reuse the content we have in a way that doesn't necessarily feel like we just reheated something or painted it blue. And certainly the end game play has to evolve with the game as we go. And we even as early as a year ago began talking about what the next evolution was. So it's something that's on our radar for sure. So once the game's live, we see how players are engaging with the game loop we have, the game mode we have. I think it's only natural to look toward the future into how we evolve that experience, because I can't say for sure that the game will subsist forever on the format we have today. But I think if you've taken a moment in any one of these sessions and stood still and listened to the low soundtrack and the wind and the trees and looked on these environments, that this game can hold so much more than just the game mode we have today, however compelling it might be. And I think it'd almost be a waste of what we've built to keep it there.
Next, I want to talk about community feedback. This actually segues into another answer that was earlier in the interview that I want to highlight, which is, I think a big question right now for a lot of people, right? There are people that are saying that, hey, this game is close to what I want, but if you change these things about it, it would be better for me. And there's also people that are in the camp of like, I like the game the way it is, don't change anything. And there's, you could definitely, I'm sure in your gaming career, you can reference a bunch of projects that you really liked that started out awesome, and then the developers started listening to the vocal minority, and then things started going downhill because they started integrating feedback elements that didn't fit the game. Or sometimes this happens. You like a game, but you're not quite, and you have to realize or come to terms with the fact that maybe you're just not the target audience, right? Like maybe you're just not in the cohort of players that like that game, and whether you like parts of it or not, they're just going, your feedback is going to fall a little on deaf ears just because you're not part of the game, that like it's not made for you. It's just one of the games you're going to have to pass on. So it's a good question to ask of like, how do the developers feel about feedback? And there are people right now that are worried that they're going to course correct or pendulum swing the other way because of the feedback they're getting of like the game right now. Some people saying it's boring. Some people say it's missing something. Some people saying it's too hard, too easy, change this, change that. What do the developers think about community feedback and the approach that they have as they listen to it?
I think it's important to remember that listening to your community is critically important, but it's how you take what you get from them and what you do with it. So on the dev team, or certainly within design, of course, we practice intent-based development, and it's just as important to understand what the intent behind what your community is telling you is. They will never have the context you have as a developer with what they're trying to tell you, but they will always be pointing to something that's true for them. And so if you can understand the intent behind what they're saying, it becomes far easier to blend that with the intent of what you're developing and find something that ideally works as a middle ground. So even if someone may say, I really hate PvP, or you should have left it as PvE, or don't nerf the snap hook, there's intent on both sides. And ideally, you end up with something that's stronger as a result of taking those two halves and making it into something.
Which is a great answer. I think that's exactly the way you should look at it, right? And I've talked about this in other games before and just kind of ideas of balancing, live balancing and things like that. But in general, you always want to figure out, like, never dismiss feedback no matter what, right? Someone wants something, someone's having a bad experience, someone's having a good experience. You always want to take that wholesale as they're telling me how they're feeling, but also try to understand what's causing that and see if you can find something that fits both the vision of the game or the project, but also solves that problem in a way. And there's multiple ways to solve a problem as well. So I think they have a good perspective on what to do with the community feedback. And again, it seems like they're kind of focused on getting the game out and then moving on from there before they start making any major changes, which I think is also a good approach. But at least now we know where their head is at on the feedback. It doesn't sound like they're going to be knee-jerking, switching the core fundamental of the game. They're happy with where it's at. They're going to ship the game and just see how things go and adjust based on metrics and about, on growth of the title. Next, since we have the art director on the panel, it's always, cool to kind of get that same perspective. So there is feedback on art creators right now, and I'm kind of in this camp myself, but the feedback is they don't like the characters, they don't like the environment. I've also seen some more politically charged statements about the color choices and some representations of flags and hotly debated topics in the world right now. I'm not going to dive into that. I care more about the game than more about the human drama that comes along with it. But there's definitely, there are people that give feedback on the environment and the characters. I've always felt like it feels very retro Ghostbusters, blockbuster kind of vibe, just super goofy in a lot of ways. And there's some people that like that, some people that don't. So let's hear it directly from the art director. What was the goal in the art style creation of the game and of the philosophy of what they created for the characters in general? And also just, is this something that might change or not, depending on feedback? There's definitely people that say, hey, great game, I think the characters are ugly, or hey, great characters, I think the game sucks, and that sort of thing. What does the art director say?
The best way to summarize what we're achieved with the sort of visual design for our creators, it goes almost hand in hand with the formation of the studio and what we attempted to do and what we tried to achieve. So early on in the inception of the studio, we tried to figure out what kind of games we want to make, and at the same time developing something that we were visually interested in exploring, things that we wanted to do, and visually arresting games. But we also wanted to stretch our legs a bit more and see what else we can do, because we had built up this desire to explore something else, something that goes beyond what we've done in the past, and at the same time developing what the game is, something that allows and has all these affordances that we want to develop with the game, something that can stretch the bounds of just reality. So we start with a very, very sort of grounded, believable approach to things, and then inject all these other sort of sci-fi isms that goes on top of this. But these also fall within a kind of a framework of having plausibility and believability attached to them, so that they serve a high degree of allowance for what we want to explore game-wise. It's all based around the idea of things that are plausible. You will understand what they are, because they are sort of intuitive in their approach. They are intuitive in their design. You can often discern what this will do based on what it looks like.
Yeah.
I think in part exploring sort of sci-fi that we wanted to sort of explore and dig more into, we jokingly said that when we developed the initial first steps and started even exploring the branding of it, the logo, we set this thing of going, it should look like it was made in 1979, making something that has a sort of, let's call it retro futuristic approach to it, so that we can lean into the things that again are perceived as very believable. You kind of recognize what these things are. They're based in something that could plausibly exist.
I think they actually achieved that. If you would just take a look at the arcs in general and some of the weapon design for like their hard surface in general, I think they actually did achieve that. Like a lot of the drones are quadcopters. The way they float and move and their physics is very relatable to real life. A lot of the mechanical components of weapons and things like that line up with what's going on, and what you would expect it to work like. And honestly, I think a lot of the arc robots are very easy to understand on how they work, right? When the pops show up, shooting the joints on like a bastion, shooting the light on the leaper, the weak points on the queen, and things like that. I think it actually does have very strong affordance of when you look at it, you understand how it works. There's some weapons like the kettle which seem kind of out there, but it's not going to be like Hideo Kojima level of like, what the frick did I just see? I don't understand how any of this works, or like Silent Hill monsters where you're like, right? Like it is very relatable and believable. And I think that his like made in 1979 fits the aesthetic. It is very retro scientific, better, sci-fi isms. It sounds like a lot of like their vision boards and descriptions match what you're gonna be seeing in the game in general. And it sounds like they kind of hit that vibe. So whether you like it or not, it is part of it. I do appreciate the fact that most things are understandable based on what they do. And hopefully we see more of that in the future as well. And on that same note, in case you're curious, they did show off some scrappy cosmetics coming along for that in general. Most of these are rigid body attachments to like the top of it, and there are some changes for the color and the feathers, but it sounds like they want to kind of highlight and show customizable options for Scrappy. Same thing for your character. Not only are you able to get like armor and customizations through the battle pass, free unlocks through challenges and some of the traders as well, but also through the deluxe edition and all that. So it kind of fits with the whole vibe and all that is there. But if you're curious, they did show some goofy Scrappy cosmetics that they didn't say how you're going to get them, but they're going to be part of the game for launch as well. Next is another elephant in the room. We've talked about a lot of elephants today, but this is definitely a big one, and that is the idea of when you play a looting game, especially one that goes on for long periods of time, there will always be inflation and bloat. And people that have 1,000 hours in Arc Raiders are going to have a large inventory and stash that is fully kitted out. They could die 20 times in a row and still have a fully maxed out purple legendary loadout over and over. And so a lot of these games that are loot-based, whether we're talking about MMOs, ARPGs, extraction shooters, everything in between, they will usually have some solution for this problem of people get too bloated over time. And so it's been brought up many times of, do you guys plan to do wipes, seasonal resets? How is the loot gonna work? Like, how do you plan on solving this problem as people get too wealthy over time? Now, I will preface this by saying is they don't have a system that they have announced. They haven't told us exactly how this will work, what the incentives will be, how the wipes will work overall. They haven't given us like, this is exactly what it is. They said that they're going to update us sometime after launch on what that will actually be. Probably at some point, in the next month or two, we'll have an update of like, hey, here's how the launch went. Here's what we think, and here's what we're going to do about it. But we did get a public response, which was very offhanded. Apologize for the audio here. The developer was actually playing the game while talking about it and made this comment, but it is kind of important for understanding what their future is for wipes and or not wipes.
So the last thing we said publicly about it is currently we do not intend to do mandatory wipes. Any of that kind of stuff we'll probably talk about a little later.
Now again, that was a very short response, but it, the way it was phrased is important, and we can glean some information for it. And I do want to cover this topic because I know it is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. So the important word to pull out from that sentence is mandatory. And they've said this multiple times in different places over the last year or so, is that they don't want to do mandatory wipes. So even if they offer wipe systems, reset systems, prestige systems, whatever the solution is that they come up with, they don't want to force you to reset if you don't want to. So unlike games like ARPGs or, like extraction shooters where they do a scheduled wipe, they don't want to force you to do it. So they will give you the option to keep all your stuff forever if you want to and just play the game as part of that loop. But there might be other ways, like, they haven't actually told us exactly what it's going to be. If we look at examples like in ARPGs where they have an evergreen server where nothing gets reset, and then they spin up seasonal servers that will be up for, a specified period of time, usually a month to 3 months where you start over together, get the loot. And I think there's a lot of people that like the reset mentality. I personally like it in general because it's nice when everybody starts over at the same time. You get to test your knowledge and skills on regaining that same wealth again. And also it's kind of cool to start a match knowing that everyone has no loot, and so you have to fight with free loadouts and common level weapons without any attachments and that sort of thing. That's kind of fun, but I know there's people that don't like it in general. So whatever that system turns into, they've kind of committed to the idea that they won't be forcing you to wipe if you don't want to, but obviously over time, if the attrition systems aren't strong enough on requiring repairs and losing gear. Obviously, if you lose gear to another player, then another player has, it's not like that loot goes away and dissolves into the air like, I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark, right? It goes to another person's inventory most of the time. And so there's definitely going to be some situations where people get too bloated, but they don't want to force you to do it. And hopefully for the people that care about that, that's something that's meaningful. But if you wanted like scheduled wipes, let me know if that was your perspective down below in the comments. The last thing I want to touch on is the idea of roadmap. They were asked point blank, do you guys have a roadmap? And the answer was point blank, no, they don't have a roadmap. But they did talk further on this topic, right? So we don't have like a here's the content that's coming, this is going to be on this day and that week, and this is what we want to do. They mentioned that they do have post-release content ready or in the chamber. It's a very good idea to do if you have a game as a service. You always want to have like your, .1 or 1.1 or whatever it is, like more content that's already been worked on, because it's not like you can snap your fingers and content spawns out of thin air. You have to plan it and work on it, so you'll have to do it before the launch happens. They said that they do have post-release content coming, as well as another layer of that for another like a .2 or something like that. But then going forward, they said that they want to kind of see what the community wants and thinks. And they also, as we've talked about, and as they've mentioned even in this video, that they have a fun playground. They have the bots, they have the players, they have the maps, they have the modes, they have the encounters, like the harvester and stuff. So they have knobs that they can turn to create new styles of content, modes, and interactions. But this was their official response when asked about what is the future of Arc Raiders? Do you plan to have this game alive for a long period of time? And do we have content coming down the pipe?
We didn't anticipate Tech Test 2's response whatsoever, so that was a huge help for us to move toward what we have today with Server Slam and launch. And I realized people would like if there was a bit more things for them to do in Server Slam, but it really is meant to be a small introduction to the game. And really, I hope with what we've got in there, people can project forward a little bit to what they can expect with launch. But of course, we would really like you to dive in on the 30th and see all of the work that we've put in since Tech Test 2, things that weren't quite ready for Tech Test 2 and now have come in on top of those things. So I'm really excited to see how people feel about getting back in there in the full experience later on. So I think internally, for a very long time, we referred to this as a 10-year game. So that is the ambition that we're aiming for, and that kind of dictates the type and quantity of content that we want to put into it. So we're not at this stage going to discuss exact roadmap details. That stuff can quickly spiral into promises that can go unfulfilled if things change. But of course, adding things over time like new maps and extending quest lines and introducing new enemies and new weapons and things like that. So we'll have some stuff lined up post-launch and for a little bit after, but then it will be based on what we see out of the launch, and then going thereafter to kind of start dropping the content that we need to.
So there you have it. That is where the developers are at. The clock is ticking now, going down to full release October 30th. So let me know what you think about these developer responses, where your head is at on the game. I know a lot of opinions are circling around right now. Has the responses from the developers changed your perspective at all? Are you still locked in, rock solid on what it is you want the game to be, or not be because you don't care? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.